even though I'm technically biological male, I keep on having the same thoughts, the same feelings about being biologically female. And the more I think about having a woman's body or looking a certain way, the more euphoric I get, you know. Whereas when I look down at myself now, I don't feel at all like myself. I look down, I do not see myself, you know, and that hurts, you know, it really does.
Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. We get curious about all things gender, sex and sexuality, as well as relationships, feminism, the inclusive kind, mental health and kink, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. If you like what we do and want to make a contribution, you can become a patron on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender or buy us a coffee. Links are on the website. Now join us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I am a queer woman and my pronouns are she and they. In this episode, I have a conversation with Christine TOKLEY. Christine's pronouns are she and her, and she's okay with they-them pronouns. She identifies as a trans woman and is also non-conforming, disabled and neurodivergent. Find out what that means to Christine in this episode. We also talk about how the spectrum of physical biological sex and that of the social construct of gender overlap, the idea of sex dysphoria rather than gender dysphoria, medical transition versus social transition and being comfortable on the inside first, supporting people in a way that works for them, the difference in how we all perceive reality, including gender, the need for nuance as well as simplification, how being aware of intention can benefit communication, and building bridges between our understanding and others. To clarify some terminology that is used in the episode, paraphilia is from the Greek para, which in this context means beyond, irregular or abnormal, and philia, which is one of the 4 ancient Greek words for love. According to Wikipedia, paraphilia, previously known as sexual perversion and sexual deviation, is the experience of intense sexual arousal to atypical objects, situations, fantasies, behaviors, or individuals. We also talk about autogynephilia. This comes from the Greek auto, meaning self, gyne, meaning woman, and philia, meaning love. According to Wikipedia, it is a term coined by sexologist Ray Blanchard in the 1980s and 90s and suggests the idea of, quote-unquote, a male's propensity to be sexually aroused by the thought of himself as a female. The theory is considered controversial, if not taboo, and has been contested as well as accused of being unnecessarily stigmatizing. The language used in communicating the theory, as well as the term autogynephilia in itself, are seen as problematic and can invalidate the identities of trans and non-binary people. That said, there are some trans people who identify with the term. You can find further resources and links to articles on the episode page. It was recorded on the 22nd of April 2022, which was also the date of publication of Sacred Redesign, How to Free Yourself from Society's Standards and Create Heaven on Earth. Meeting Christine was the inspiration for the book chapter that I contributed to this multi-author book, and it's available on Amazon as an ebook now. The paperback will be available on May 6th. Now let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome.
Hello.
What's your name?
Christine.
Hello, Christine.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about gender.
I know, right?
Yeah, so this is the first conversation I've done in a long time in person.
Yeah.
The rest of them have been mostly via the internet. So, yeah, it's kind of nice to sit opposite someone again. So
yeah, and this is my first podcast. I've never really been on a podcast before, so
cool.
It's going to be an experience for me. So let's go. Let's see what
That's
happens.
Cool. Yeah. So you've said to me, basically, we could start at the beginning, really. So we've known each other for a few weeks, and we met in the tea shop in Norwich, and that's also been the
Bird and Blend. Go check it out. Their tea is amazing.
It is.
Do it now.
Yeah. So that's also what inspired the chapter I wrote for this book. That's just been, actually it's out today, which is all very synchronous.
Mm-hmm.
So it's called Sacred Redesign, and meeting you and our conversation was the inspiration for me writing this chapter. So basically, you told me when we met, basically in our first conversation, you told me about, just trying to think of the words you used. I think you just said something along the lines of, I've been suffering from gender dysphoria for years. And you also said you came out, well, coming out is a bit of a subject, isn't it? But you had a realization about your gender, which is not very long ago. It's just over a year ago.
Yeah.
So would you tell me a bit about what happened then? What did you realize, and how did that come about?
It was a pretty sort of long and tricky process, really, because for a long time I didn't really know what it was. I had all of these feelings and everything, and thoughts, and for years I just kept on brushing them off. I thought there was something wrong with me, for thinking that way or feeling this way. But I think when I started looking into things, and I guess I should probably start with saying that a few years ago I ended up by going through like a very, very intense downward spiral into things like depression, anxiety, all of this, stuff in regards to brushing it off, included things like, my health, all of these other, had so many different facets of my life that were like interfering with this aspect of me, which I never really had time to think about because everything else was just sort of like upfront, especially my health, my living situation, all the mental stuff, me being in care and having to deal with all of that,
Do you feel things were like adding up and stacking up and getting on top of you? Yeah.
And, I ended up by having substance abuses and all sorts of stuff. Very, very toxic stuff. And eventually I ended up by having a reliance on weed to actually like eat food and everything. So it got really, really bad. Until one day, just out of the blue on New Year's Eve, 2020, going into 2021, I asked myself, what do I want? And I sat there for a while, just sort of thinking about, what do I want? What do I want? And for some reason, the first thing that came into my head was, I wish I was a girl. And it was like just a very intense kind of moment because it just made sense at the time. And I had so many I had to process it all. And I had loads of past memories and everything about thinking about this for years and stuff. So
did you feel like certain things maybe clicked into place for you?
Yeah. It was like, this is a goal that, I want to achieve, because I had been brushing it off for so long because it's still very new to me. Because you come to this realization in your life and it's like so impactful. And when I say it's like so impactful, I quit smoking straight away. I stopped smoking weed. I got off of that. It all happened within a couple of months. I just went complete cold turkey, became clean of everything, and started eating healthier, trying to gain weight because I was losing a lot of weight. And, I'm still fairly slim now, but that's just because my metabolism's very high. So me having like this realization kind of was just like, I was just like, yes, this is it. I just know, like, this is the path. I know that this is right for me. which helped me make right decisions, like improving myself every single day. I've still got like a long way to go, but that's how I first sort of realized.
Yeah. So you used the words. I mean, we've spoken a lot about this, and like before we're recording this as well. And the words you just used were like, "I wish I were a girl."
Yeah, wish I was born one.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, a lot of people would consider to be like internalized transphobia, because it's like that self-perception of me being like, right, I want to be a girl. Well, does that mean that I'm still thinking I'm a boy? In a lot of ways, yes, but it's a lot deeper than that, because of various things that we'll eventually cover.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, did you feel like you had a real sense of who you are?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of like stereotypes surrounding what it means to be a man, a woman,
Yeah, totally.
what it means to be feminine, what it means to be masculine. And in a lot of ways, I don't fit any of that. But when it comes to physical senses, there is definitely like a mixed match, because I keep having thoughts of being, even though I'm technically biological male, I keep on having the same thoughts, the same feelings about being biologically female. And the more I think about having a woman's body or looking a certain way, the more euphoric I get. Whereas when I look down at myself now, I don't feel at all like myself. I look down, I do not see myself. And that hurts. That really does.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So what you've just described, I guess that sounds like what gender dysphoria is like. And obviously, as someone who hasn't experienced that, well, not obviously, but like, this is something I have not experienced for myself. I feel like I'm questioning, like, what does it mean to me to be a woman? But I've never had the sensation of, well, I know being like feeling like you're in the wrong body is also a bit of a stereotype, and it doesn't always apply necessarily.
Yeah. It's so diverse as well. I mean, but I think there is ways to differentiate things for, like, on a more medical basis, in terms of things that are more tangible in biology, rather than things that I don't, the word I'm kind of looking for some reason is etherical. So like people who either identify as another race, or identify as an alien or an animal, things like that. It's very, very different to gender dysphoria, because those types of things are, I mean, it's such a weird concept, it eludes me, but transracial, to me, that doesn't make sense. Like, because that's down to your genes, right? And if you said that, like, your culture, like if you're transcultural, that would make more sense to me, because that's more possible, because you can be, because you could have been brought up in China and then raised and lived in the UK, right? There's two cultures there, right? Does that mean you're Chinese or British, right? But on a genetic level, they are Chinese, right? So this whole like thing to do with like transracial debate it's very, very different to something like gender dysphoria, because you've got a lot of these physical aspects of sex versus socially constructed ideas of gender.
Mm.
And the feelings that I have of gender dysphoria result in a mixed match of my biological sex. It's got nothing to do with my gender, if that makes sense. Like the whole socially constructed idea of gender.
And gender roles, you mean?
Like gender roles, like...
And like masculine and feminine.
Masculine,
stuff.
feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, to me, a lot of the socially constructed ideas of things, I mean, the fact that they are social constructs means that they're more like clay. They can move around and change.
Yeah.
Whereas biological sex is something that's like slate or hard rock or obsidian. It's something that's a lot harder to kind of move around, but you can still chip away at it. You know,
interesting. Yeah.
Just how there are many different like rocks and crystals out there. You know, biological sex comes in all different shapes and sizes. Whether or not that has anything to do with the socially constructed idea of gender, to me, that they are two completely different things. You know.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so you spoke before about that gender dysphoria versus sex dysphoria or sex dysmorphia.
Yeah,
not quite sure. Yeah,
because dysmorphia is where you feel as if like there's something wrong with your body. You know, or like, I mean, there are people that feel like that they should be wheelchair bound, or like there are people out there that feel like that they have some grotesque things like having their arm cut off or something. They feel like that they should have that, right? That's dysmorphia. It's something to do with their body
and the shape of it,
like the shape of their body. You know, and the way I'm experiencing gender dysphoria is basically very, very similar to dysmorphia, but in terms of my biological sex, I feel like I should have a female body, as well as like I'd say like brain chemistry as well. But that's very complicated.
Yeah. Say more about that if you want to.
Well, I think it's a fairly diverse thing, but like they say that, you know, people who are trans have the same kind of brain patterns or the same kind of like brain autonomy to that of their assigned, so like the gender they think they are, you know, or the biological sex they think they are. So like, take for example a trans woman, they may have like a body of a male, but they genuinely have a female brain. You know, it matches very close to what we'd call cis women and their brain patterns, their brain structure, etc. I think they've found that that's actually
like
a thing.
Research,
yeah, there's actually research there. So
yeah, that makes sense. So I just wanted to sort of go back to when you had your realization of who you are, and that made you take actions to, like, you know, improve your life. And what is it? How do you want to proceed?
Well, I essentially do want to fully transition. There's a lot of things that I want to work towards. You know, there are a lot of things about myself which would give me dysphoria. So doing a complete transition from male to female is kind of where I want to go. How to actually get there is completely new to me. For instance, the only thing I've done is spoken to my GP and they've given me a referral. Like, that's the only thing that's happened. So whether I'm not on a waiting list, I have no idea. I did get a letter from the gender clinic from London, but that's it.
Yeah. So now you have to wait.
Yeah.
Is that it? Yeah.
Now this whole idea of waiting is just very tedious, because the longer it takes, I would also say that the struggle gets harder.
Mm.
I guess it is kind of affirming that there are like trans women out there that have like transitioned later in life and they've gone through, it all and have achieved the results that they wanted to achieve.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, I'm kind of like eased by that.
Mm-hmm.
I think what kind of discourages me a little bit is my health. The fact that I don't want there to be like any issues in regards to taking hormones, and if my current health, including certain disabilities that I have, would interfere with my hormone treatment if I ever have it, that's just going to devastate me. I feel I think that's going to be tough to kind of deal with because I won't be able to achieve the results I want to go for.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
another thing that I wanted to ask you about, because I think when you introduced yourself to me initially, or even when we've been out and about having a walk on a chat and stuff, and you've introduced yourself to other people, you introduce yourself as Chris.
Yeah.
And you feel like Chris is obviously one of those names that is very like it's a very universal name, I guess, like gender wise, I suppose. So for you, that it's short for Christine rather than, it's very much an internal thing for you. So from what I've seen and observed, you are very much still, I don't know if the word is presenting, but like when it comes to transition, when we've talked before, we talked about medical versus social transition.
Yeah.
And
very, very different things.
Yeah. So from what I've heard as well, like in the past, when someone who, I don't know, comes to the realization or finally comes out, whatever their process is, and they start this process of transitioning, I believe they were first expected to be like doing a social transition, like live as the gender they are.
I mean, I'll let you in on something. I mean, I generally think that the majority of trans people in general, before they come out, don't want to.
Right.
Because of how much social pressure there is and how like just how impactful it is all, and the fact that they don't actually want to be trans. I mean, that was one of my first realizations as well. Like, I didn't want to be this way, but I am. So like there's that part of it. And then what was the question again?
Yeah, so the social transition versus the medical transition, I believe you are kind of expected to socially transition first, and it's almost like the assessment then in the journey of transition, like based on that, they then almost allow you to medically transition. But also, like, some of the things that we've talked about and that I found really insightful is that social transition feels like doing social transition before medical transition.
Yeah, so like it's always expected to almost socially transition before going through the physical side of things. And I think in general that actually probably causes more problems than it's worth. Like sometimes, like, and that's why a lot of people, I think, who are trans sometimes question, like, oh, it's not worth transitioning, or like, they actually struggle to transition because of that expectation to socially do it first rather than going through the physical stuff first, because there's all of these different assets to socially transitioning first, including having to being referred as certain pronouns, either changing your name, wearing different clothes, presenting in a certain way. And some of it can be quite intense. I mean, I've seen so many trans people, especially trans women, who they come out as trans and then they end up by presenting hyper feminine, and then sometimes they wonder why they're getting a lot of transphobia. And it's not like a dig at them or anything, but like it's because of that expectation of presenting a certain way and the amount of stereotypes that are surrounded by what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man, etc. What it means to be feminine. It can make dysphoria so much worse.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, actually, like, because it's almost like from what I'm sort of learning and observing, the medical part of transitioning, so medical transition, taking the hormones can often have an effect of like, well, finally I feel like I'm running on the right fuel.
Yes.
And there's a sense of maybe more ease that comes with that.
Because it's like, I'm going to try and use an analogy here.
Go for it.
Lobsters tend to be used as an analogy quite a lot.
Lobsters?
Yeah, lobsters.
Okay.
Like, if you've ever heard the analogy of a lobster's shell will cause stress when the lobster tries to grow. So it has to shed its shell to grow a new one. Right? And that's part of growth. Right? We do this to grow as people. We need stress to grow in life. Right? How this relates to being trans is being able to work on the internal growth, being comfortable from the inside first, before you can actually create that shell, or like break through the current existing shell. Because imagine it this way, you there's all that pressure of having to socially transition like first. To me, that it's like you're putting a shell on top of another shell that's already there, right? Rather than doing the other way around, which is to physically transition first, preferably hormones rather than any like surgeries, because I think surgeries is kind of something that's a bit more nuanced, and you kind of want to take time with that kind of decision. But like going through the physical transition process to make yourself comfortable in your own skin, for you to then grow from that, to then become the person that you are, rather than
doing the outside stuff,
being socially pressured into something that you could like forced into being something that you're not. So
yeah, that makes sense. So I mean, obviously it's different. I guess it's different for everyone. So some people might be, when they come out or when they have that realization, they might be like, wow, now I can finally just present in the way I want as well.
Because from my own personal experience, I feel more dysphoric going out buying certain clothes that I would like to wear, knowing that if I wear it, it's not going to look right. Or it's, it's like as simple as I can put it. Me going out buying clothes or, doing certain things, and just not being able to, because I feel so much dysphoria from it. Whereas alleviating that dysphoria by making myself feel comfortable in my own body first will allow me to feel more comfortable doing things socially, because I'm comfortable. I would be comfortable in my own body that way. I mean, it would take time. There would be other things like, and it's not going to completely like get rid of gender dysphoria straight away by going on hormones. It takes time, and there are other things that you going to have to take into consideration in regards to going through hormones. But doing it through that process sounds more gender affirming than being forced to do things which could cause more gender dysphoria, which means more depression, which means a higher risk of I mean, not in my case, but higher risk of suicide rates for other trans people.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and it makes a lot of sense how. I mean, obviously, each to their own. Some people might just feel like now I can finally present the way I want, and and dress and express myself in this way, and that feels good to me. But I can also appreciate that it might just emphasize that gap between where you are and where you want to be, like physically, perhaps. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So I think I've asked you this before when we've had conversations and stuff, but I think it's good to talk about like how, like meeting someone, like making a new friend, meeting a trans person, when they tell you who they are, and like how to best support people in that. Because when you told me about your gender dysphoria and who you really are, I was a bit like, oh my goodness, now I feel like I want to be your advocate and I want to support you and affirm you however I can, in whatever way I can. But it is also obviously important to do that in a way that works for you. So rather than me like, I'll shout off the rooftops, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm here for you, I'm on your team. But then you might feel like in certain circumstances, you don't want that. And in other circumstances, you might be okay with that. So I think I've asked you things like, when I introduce you to someone, what pronouns should I use, and how do I approach this? Because you're very much in this place of like,
it's still so new.
Yeah, it's new, and you don't want to socially transition until you start your medical or physical transition, In
a lot of ways. I mean, I do have friends who refer to me as she, and they actually are helping me through a sort of social lens per se. So there is kind of like, that aspect that is happening. It's not. I mean, not everyone is, and it doesn't bother me hugely, mainly just because I'm not the type of person to really let things like that get to me. Like I am very focused on what I need to do, right? And just knowing that things will change over time. I have that reassurance in my brain, so when someone misgenders me, it doesn't hugely affect me. Like, I wouldn't say it's disappointing. I'll just say it's like, right, yeah, they are misgendering me. But my reaction isn't that of, I wouldn't say it like, I don't initially get hurt from it, because at the end of the day, they are words, and I don't tend to get hurt from words, and I have a very sort of, broad mindset of they're only human, they make mistakes. So, I know a lot of people out there would be like, oh, you shouldn't let them misgender you, should try and be much affirming as possibly can and stuff like that. And I'm like, in some cases, yeah, like it would be ideal, but for me, I feel like me transitioning is going to be a two-way street. I feel like it's something that I have to work on. I've got things to deal with, but then so have they, and they can work on it in their own time within the parameters of how I'm transitioning, because it will alleviate any kind of, to me it seems like it would alleviate a lot more discomfort, or I don't want people who I'm like in such socially contacted with to kind of like feel bad about it because of a lot of the stigmatism surrounding today's society around it all. So like, if someone's misgendering me, I'm not going to be mad at them at all.
Yeah.
You
mean like people in general, people who know about who you are?
Yeah. Both. Will I talk to them about it? Yeah, sure. I'll let them know.
Yeah.
And that's only because there's a vast spectrum of perception out there.
Yeah.
And not everyone's the same. We all perceive gender very differently. We all perceive sex differently. The way we take in information is very, very different. We all perceive reality completely different.
That's true. Yeah.
So it's just being patient and me taking the necessary step that I have to take, because there are things out there, in regards to perception of gender. So you have people more inclined to take in information via their senses, the five senses. You have people out there that are more focused on empirical information, logic. Same with rationality. Same with intuition. Same thing with sort of like moving through the world. Like people just do stuff. Some people have like a think before they do or do before they think mentality.
Yeah.
There's so much sort of nuance to perception, and so how that impacts gender and how that relates to gender, every single person's gonna take in that information differently. So someone who is more inclined to take in information on, like, I'd say, like their five senses, what they physically see, what they physically touch, they'll have more of a sort of grounded in reality, like it would be like grounded in physical reality kind of sense of gender, meaning that it would be very close to tied in to like things like biological sex, rather than the socially constructed ideas of what gender is.
Yeah.
And then the vice versa of that, which is biological sex is completely irrelevant, and everything to do with gender is completely socially constructed, including biological sex. I mean, both of these perceptions are polar opposites to each other. Both are true, right? Because the truth lies somewhere between the middle of those two perceptions. But then there's a multitude of perceptions surrounding information regarding what gender is, what sex is,
Yeah.
And, someone who deals with more sort of like rational thinking or like external facts and stuff like that, things like the opinions that they get from other people, that's how they'll formulate their own perception of reality, through other people's facts or other people's perception of reality, rather than their own internal logic. That's the difference between rationality and logic. Rationality is forming an idea, forming something based on external views, external facts, or like information you see externally, rather than something that is purely original, like logic. And then, there's a multitude of, there's like a massive spectrum between all of these different ways of thinking and feeling and stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it is an interesting one, isn't it? Because I always think, like, or what I've been more recently becoming aware of is like the way others perceive us. It can never be like the same as how we perceive ourselves, or how even we perceive that others perceive us.
Yeah.
Because we all have our own map of the world and our own ideas of what the world is like, and our own reality and experience, mostly. Yeah.
So it's like, if we take a step back and think that language in itself is a social construct, so anything that we describe is a socially constructed thing to describe reality, right? So if you take that and then relate it to how people like perceive different aspects of what is deemed masculine. So take my voice, for instance. I have, there's raspiness to it. I mean, there's a reason for that. So it's going to sound masculine in a lot of ways. And because of that, if I was in like a online chat or something, people will hear me and will think male, right?
Totally.
And that's completely understandable, because that's a perception. Same if someone was to look at me, on the street, and then they see that I have sometimes have facial hair, or, male pattern balding, or other types of things, they will see that as male. But then there would be other qualities that I have which could be considered female.
Yeah. Coming back to gender dysphoria versus sex dysphoria, was there more you wanted to say on that?
Okay, so I'll start by saying that nowadays the idea of gender being it is a social construct, and how that sort of point of view is slightly becoming more mainstream, and the fact that gender and sex are two different things, I think that there could be a potential very, very different kind of ways of feeling gender dysphoria. Like I said, separating it between the biological sex aspects of there being a mismatch between biological sex versus the biological sex that you feel like you should be, right? Then there's the social constructs of what it means to be a gender, and how there can be like a complete mass. I mean, there is a spectrum of sex, but there's also a spectrum of gender. So, there's like two different spectrums there. The spectrum of sex is based completely around biological factors. And there are people out there that exist on this spectrum. Do the majority of the population fit into two peaks? Yes. But there will be people in between or outside of these peaks,
totally.
In vast varieties of different ways. It's not just about chromosomes. It's not just about our hormone levels. It's also about how we grow, the state of our cells, like how our genes manifest. There's so much to it that there is generally a spectrum of sex. Now, is the spectrum of sex different to what I would consider the spectrum of gender? Yeah, because I think the spectrum of gender is more a self-perceived image of socially constructed ideas, an ideology of what it means to be a gender.
Like internalized stuff.
I'd say that's more internalized.
Yeah.
And this includes, I mean, because it's social, it's like what men do, what women do, right? I mean, I reckon there are kind of like peaks in that, and we socially construct avenues, I want to say, into what certain genders do, and how they navigate through the world,
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that separates the socially constructed ideas of what gender is versus the biological aspects of a spectrum of sex, and conflating the two is very, very tricky because they generally, in a lot of cases, are kind of interchangeable in some cases, but the vast majority of it isn't. It's just because people so heavily associate socially constructed ideals of what it means to be a gender onto biological, because there are these two peaks.
Yeah.
And they see, oh, right, there's two peaks on both of these socially constructed things and physical things, so they overlap, but...
So they think it's one and the same thing, or like...
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're inseparable. Like they merge.
Yeah, but but this is the thing. You can have someone that is biologically male, but can literally do anything that is socially what a female does.
Mm-hmm.
Socially, we're not talking about biology. Socially.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
And this is why you have a lot more non-binary people out there today, because they are socially... I'm not trying to quote unquote gaslight non-binary people, because their experience is completely different to what I'm experiencing, so I probably just got no idea, but they are combining elements of the social constructs of what it means to be man or a woman, or even neither. So they don't perceive the socially constructed idea of women must do this thing socially, that means woman. So it's more like, this is a concept that people do. They are a person, they just don't assign a gender to it, so socially they are non-binary, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting one,
because this whole... I don't really know much about non-binary, and whether or not... I think non-binary can exist on a sexual spectrum as well as a social spectrum. I think it's more evident in a social spectrum because essentially, to me, what I feel like the whole non-binary scene is them dismantling the ideas that men should do this, female should do this, etc., etc., saying that you don't have to be a certain gender to do those things, hence presenting in a non-binary format, right? Now, how it could manifest on a biological level is someone who literally has either both masculine and feminine traits. They are completely in between what it means to be biologically male and biologically female, and we would call those people intersex. It could not just be intersex people, it could literally be someone who could look male, but they just have female chromosomes, and vice versa. Someone who looks female, but they have male chromosomes.
Yeah, there's a lot of varieties there, aren't there? And that is an interesting one, actually. So there's the biological biologically non-binary, I guess, is what intersex
technically could
be seen as. And also I also feel like there's, from what I've seen from non-binary people, I've spoken to a few of them, they're all very different experiences and very different expressions of that. And also there is a lot of stereotyping assigned to that as well, I feel, because I think some people would assume, some maybe cis people or not gender diverse people, but if someone would say they're non-binary, or if they think of a non-binary person, what they might think about is someone who presents in an androgynous way, whereas that's not necessarily the case at all. So it's all, there's a lot of variety there. But I also like the idea of considering all these different facets of it, whatever gender you are, non-binary or otherwise, there is a social side to that, and then there's a biological side to that, potentially. For some people there might be variations there, for others there might not be. There's a lot to it.
Sometimes it is kind of a difficult thing, because not everyone's going to think about gender and sex that deeply.
Of course, yeah. Because the thing is, we don't have to. for the most part.
No.
Because if we're just getting on with our lives in society and just being who we're being.
I think the majority of society does like to simplify things or wants to simplify things. There's nothing really wrong with that, but I think dismissing the nuance is almost as bad as saying things shouldn't be simplified. You know, they both exist. They are both things, you know.
Yeah.
And one can't exist without the other. You need people to look into the nuance and tell people that people who discover the nuance are the ones that need to simplify it or explain it to people who don't seek that nuance, who only can see things through a simplified form. And the people who are, I'm not going to say simple-minded, but that's the only words that come into my mind, and I don't mean it in a derogatory way.
Yeah.
They are the ones that can teach people with the nuance to bring it into a simple form, to make it understand, to like ask for that. It's that cooperation between the two, you know.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot to take something like subjects that are very complex in and of themselves, like gender and sex, and make them, like, simplify them, you know. Yeah.
It's just, unfortunately, biases of the...
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing... well, some biases are dangerous, but that's a completely different topic. I mean, there is a lot of transphobia out there that is intentional. There's no doubting that. But a lot of it, I think people who... I think in a lot of cases, people generally aren't meaning to be transphobic. Because it's...
Do you feel it's more ignorance than anything else?
I think it starts with intent. I think the main focus on transphobia should be intent, to be transphobic. If people aren't intending to be transphobic, then there's a conversation there. You know, there's that's a place where, you know, we kind of have to take a step back and think, right, how can I explain to this person about transness, or like, what can I say to build a bridge between their understanding and my understanding? You know, and what questions can I ask them about how they perceive things, rather than me being demanding and saying, you have to do this, you have to do this, right? That alienates people. I don't want to alienate people. I want to bring people together, you know, and work towards it. Work towards this with people together, you know.
Yeah.
Instead of what, unfortunately, a lot of some people seem to do is just be super demanding and then end up by alienating people and then making presumed judgments on certain people because of either certain comments or initially people who don't support it straight away. For instance, this whole idea of being misgendered, I find that a lot of people have a lot of impossible standards in regards to it. Like the whole concept of there being allies, trans allies, right? And you're in a friendship group and one person's trans or a couple of people are trans, and these trans people are getting misgendered, but the allies are not doing anything to be gender affirming, right? To kind of like be supportive. And then what I find kind of, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, in some ways petty, is cutting off those allies just because they didn't
do the right
thing by saying, you know, the right pronouns or something, you know.
Yeah, that is such, I mean, that is such a tricky subject, because I've been in a situation where I've seen this happen.
Me too.
And I'm like, I genuinely like almost froze, and I didn't know what to do, because I was like, do I call this out? Do I say something? If so, what do I say? Because obviously I also don't want to put the other person on the spot, because they might not want me to be like, hey, do you know what I mean? And it's like, you don't have to be confrontational about it, of course not. But it is so tricky, and you almost have to really have in-depth conversations with people, like, okay, in this hypothetical scenario, that is, that could happen. What do you want me to do? Like, how can I support you? What do I do that would actually help you? And another question I just thought of was like, what do you wish people asked you when it comes to, I don't know, I mean, people who know you and know who you are gender-wise as well, that might want to support you better, but maybe don't quite know how. What do you wish they would ask you?
In a lot of ways, very similar conversations like this, where we actually talk about not just the issues that I've had, but the whole thing as a concept, and affirm like bridge building in regards to meeting them halfway, right? Because I think as a general rule, I think at the most part, I think people do generally mean well. I think there's a lot of people that generally do have malicious intent as well, but I think the vast majority of people, including the people that come across fairly insensitive, are still trying to mean well. I don't think that they, especially some of like, when I say insensitive people, I don't mean it in the sense of like they're actually being transphobic or anything, because it's like I said, it's all to do with intent. It's like because of the way that they perceive reality, the way they have formulated opinions, the way that they have come to have a perception of gender politics or the community in regards to the LGBT community. So they may say like a comment, but does that mean that they have malicious intent against you? Probably not. Like I have a friend who, in a lot of ways, a lot of people will probably, find this pretty crappy, but I have a friend who was struggling to find clothes to wear, to buy for his girlfriend, and they basically asked me. They go, "Oh, you're a girl now. You should know what girls like. What should I get?" And there's a lot to unpack from that,
right? Yeah.
Because someone can straight up go, "Well, that's transphobic. Oh my god, what are you saying?" Like, and I understand where they're coming from, but his intent wasn't malicious. His intent was, in general, just making a joke, right? Now, was it a good joke? Humor is subjective. He probably found that funny. He was trying to make a situation funny and probably disregarded the potentiality of how I would feel, right? But that's just how his brain works. It's got nothing really to do with him intentionally trying to bring me down, right?
Yeah, I guess because people can be unintentionally hurtful. That doesn't mean they're not hurtful, but I mean, it doesn't justify it or anything like that necessarily. But it is such a fine, like, gray area, I suppose, isn't it? And it's something that, I think we just have to talk about.
I mean, I generally think the majority of it comes down to intent. If people are intending to be transphobic, then they are genuinely transphobic.
Yeah.
But I think it's a bit more complicated when someone doesn't really have that intention. They're not really intending to be transphobic. I don't think it's fair on them. Like I said, like, we need to have conversations.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And
it
kind of makes sense, like in a similar way to if I know someone is trans, for example, I need to talk to this person, like, how can I best support you? If I have a friend who's neurodivergent, they might tell me things like, look, this thing that you probably don't even think about, that really upsets me, so please don't do that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There are conversations we need to have because we all make assumptions. I feel like I have my own version of neurodivergence, which can be very different to someone else who's neurodivergent.
Yeah.
And like sensory overload, for example, can be a thing for people, and something that most people don't even think about is actually just really upsetting and hurtful to people, and actually physically painful as well. And like if someone's struggling with their mental health, I would, and if there's someone close to me or a friend of mine, I'd want to know, like, how can I support you? Is there anything I can do when you feel this particular way? It's just all these conversations that we, I guess, should be having more of.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things, I don't know if I've asked you this before, but like, are you generally always okay with me using she, her pronouns?
Yeah.
Are those are your pronouns?
Mm-hmm.
So would you in every situation always be okay with me using those pronouns for you? Cool. Yeah. So that's something that's good to know, because I think like it's easy to make assumptions. Like, for example, when we just talked about social transition versus medical transition, not versus, but but like, yeah, it's something that I wouldn't maybe be sure of. Like, would you be okay with that in any situation?
Like I said, I try to take, I tend to take a look at each concept individually. There are like these broad concepts, but then there's like nuance to each concept. And in regards to the social idea of, she, her pronouns, for me, in relation to what I've said in regards to socially transitioning, is more or less the same thing as when someone like misgenders me, when I say that they are literally words. So the words themselves, in regards to me being called she, her, it's not really going to affect me as much as it would affect me when someone calls me he, him, because I try not to let those things get to me. So even though she, her is more affirming to me, it doesn't really make much difference.
And you feel like that is the case because you're very much in a place of not socially transitioning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's why I feel like I have so many questions, like she, her pronouns, are they always okay? And like if we're walking around and I run into a friend of mine and I introduce you, would you like me to introduce you as Chris like you do, or is it okay to introduce you as Christine? Like
either or.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a very interesting thing. I mean, a lot of people in my life have turned around. Like, I've got one friend who has started referring to me as Christine a lot more now.
How does that feel?
Yeah, it feels great. I mean,
yeah,
it just feels normal. Yeah, I'd say there's probably like 2-3 people in my life who refer to me as Christine all the time, mostly. And I'd say like everyone else calls me Chris. But yeah, I've still got a long way to go with other people in my life, though, especially like family, I think. I mean, my brother's like very supportive. I still think he's sort of fairly trying to get used to it still.
Yeah.
But he was the first person I actually came out to. Because he had his struggles as well. There's a lot of other things. And is someone that I find quite admirable because he's very comfortable with what he does, and I admire that, because he's a drag queen, which I think is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I just find that very, very admirable because like he's just so comfortable in what he does, and he's a performer and everything, and he's fairly extroverted as well, and then he sways like
unlike us INFJs, right?
I know, right?
Yeah.
Mental. But in regards to other family members, I guess that's where it's very difficult, especially parents, because obviously they have seen me grow up. They've seen me develop into a person, and I've come to have a very strong kind of ingrained perception of me. And to have that completely change almost overnight is going to be so it's still very difficult for them. And I do not hold it against them in the slightest. Like, I do genuinely think my mother is supportive. Does she misgender me a lot? Yeah. But is that her fault? I do not think so at all. Because, like I said before, she's got like this ingrained kind of mother-son relationship. So she's had that from in the past. And to that change to a mother-daughter relationship is, completely new to her. So yeah, there's a lot that my mother has to kind of like unpack there as well. In regards to my dad, it's very difficult in that regard because I don't really talk to him that much. I mean, he's in the States as well, so I don't see him at all. And the way that gender politics is in the States is insane.
Yeah.
So, and my dad's from the South, so in a lot of ways there is like some kind of biases, whether he is aware of them or not. But would I like the perceptions to change? Yeah, I would, idealistically, but it's not going to change overnight. So.
Well, you sound very patient with especially people close to you and with friends, And yeah, I like what you say about building bridges because, like, although I appreciate that some trans people, non-binary people, gender non-conforming people, I can so imagine them getting fed up and just sick and tired of like. And the thing is, maybe the whole thing with malicious intent, it's not always, you don't always know straight off. And you almost, I think you come to expect it, when you've been subjected to certain language and stuff. And sometimes it can even seem like it's not malicious to start with, but it kind of maybe develops that way. And it must be really difficult to trust that people are, for the most part, more curious than malicious. Yeah. If that's not been your experience, if you just get grief all the time from all sorts of people, more than and I think then that can make it so that anyone who is maybe curious, you cut them off or you don't want to talk to them and stuff, which is it's fair. It's totally fair because I feel like people who are trans and going through, and other genders, they don't owe us an education. It's not their job to educate others and cis folks and people who want to be better allies and stuff. So yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's why I think it's important to have as much positive representation. And I think the thing that doesn't help is how the media portray us. Because I mean, that was something that I was struggling with very, very, for years, because obviously I was seeing how trans people were depicted, and for years I was like, yeah, that's not me, because that's not my experience. I'm not experiencing that. What I'm experiencing is completely different, and I would try and research that, and then that's when I found this whole concept on autogynephilia, and then I researched into that, and I'm like, hang on a second, the way that they're describing it isn't 100% accurate to me either. There is a couple of things that the autogynephilic description is somewhat accurate, you know.
I mean, what have you learned, for people who don't know what that is? What have you discovered about that? What is it?
Oh, I hate it so much.
It is a very controversial subject, isn't it? It's not much talked about.
It's done in like stereotypes, and it's not fair because it's not actually. I mean, the way that they do it is their main focus is on men. They don't, or like men thinking that they're women. So it's so bloody awkward. But like, their main focus is on like trans women rather than looking at transness as a whole. So it's like, this thing is a paraphilia that only exists in men, right? Which is based on them getting sexually aroused by being perceived as a woman and wearing women's clothes. There is like the slightest inclinage of being aroused by the idea of me being a woman, because in a lot of ways that kind of gives me euphoria, like gender euphoria.
You mean the idea of you as a woman?
Yes.
That in and of itself.
And you know, it's not just sexual, it's like everything. So obviously that includes sex, but like there are other things. And this is the problem with this whole idea of autogynephilia, which is, it's like main focus is on the whole sexual desire, paraphilia kind of desire of it all, and it doesn't, it's not all about that. You know, it's so nuanced and stuff. So
yeah,
I mean, I'm pretty sure it's been debunked, but like, and it's not fair on people who are trans who are also neurodivergent or who have autism, because the autogynephilic thing apparently is that the majority of people who are autogynephiles are people who have like severe autism.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Whereas,
I don't know too much about the subject, but what I sort of looked up what it was a while ago because I came across the term. But what I find is, it is interesting, like you say, it's mostly focused on trans women, looking into that, rather than gender as a whole. But also, from my perspective, like if you think about sex and how we experience sex, our bodies are an important part of that. So how can you separate those things out? Like how can the way you experience yourself in your body, how can that not be a part of sex and the way you experience like sexual desire and arousal and stuff?
Yeah.
You know, so I'm like, even if that is a thing for people, what's wrong with that? You know, there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
As long as what you're doing with it is not hurting anyone else and it's consensual and, you know, all that stuff, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so, you know, that's what I was thinking about it. Yeah. So you mentioned disabilities and, you know, being in care and stuff. I mean, how do you feel like your disability, and perhaps does that link to your gender? Is that related in any way? Is there a crossover over anything like that?
I think in some ways there are, especially in like some cases with like the dysmorphia side of things. Because when I was born, I had a lot of issues. I've got a lot of urinary tract issues, so I've got kidney issues, bladder issues. I had a problem with my urethra when I was born; it was blocked. I was also born with an umbilical hernia, and later on down the line, it was a normal hernia. The normal hernia affected me in such a way which later on in life has actually caused some development issues in regards to the nether regions. And because, I mean, I'm actually pretty much against circumcision, but I find that to be a form of mutilation because it's non-consensual. You know, it's like asking the difference between it's like asking someone to get is it moral to give a baby a tattoo? The argument, a lot of people would say, hell no. But I was circumcised though, yet that's allowed. You know, so
yeah, it's very much
and all of going back to the urethral problem, the hernia problem, a lot of that had led to, like I say, development issues, and it's basically like the muscle regions down there don't kind of work properly. So it's curved than most. I'm just going to say it because I hate it. Yeah, it's curved than most. The muscle at the base doesn't really help it stay up. And testicular wise, it's I've got one underdeveloped testicle, and I've got scars underneath from when I had to have the hernia sort of sorted out, because I had to and I also have got plenty of scars down there anyway, because I also had my testicles manually dropped at a very, very young age. So a lot of that, in taking all of that into account, how it affected sort of gender dysphoria, is that I think in some ways a lot of that has kind of impacted my testosterone level, because it's very 50-50, you know, generally, because one is underdeveloped and one is developed. I mean, I'm 25 now, so you know, I've had a lot of years to basically being acclimatized to testosterone. But in regards to bottom surgery or anything, it's something I've given a lot of thought to. And whenever that conversation happens, it's something that I probably would be interested in, because I'm not interested in having kids, you know, and literally things down there don't work how they're really supposed to, you know.
I mean, in addition to how you feel about it because of dysphoria.
Yeah. And the way I go to the toilet is completely different to how everyone else goes to the toilet anyway.
Right.
Because I use a catheter through different means to how normal people would.
Yeah.
You know, because I have a valve at the side of my stomach, which I insert a catheter through. So basically that's that, you know.
Yeah.
But in regards to any kind of thing in terms of neurodivergency, I really do struggle to see any kind of relevance there. I know that there is a lot of people who are neurodivergent that come out as trans. You know, there is possibly some kind of correlation there, but I generally think that neurodivergency is something that is very misunderstood, because it's basically putting in ways of thinking, ways of moving, ways of feeling, all into a box that doesn't fit in with the majority of people. So calling it things like autism and having all of these medical quote unquote definitions for it, like ADHD or other things like that, is meaningless, because there is a spectrum of people. There are people who will exist on a majority scale versus people who exist on a minority scale. Like personality types, things like that. With the Myers-Briggs stuff that we're both into.
Yeah.
There are common types and there are rarer types. And the rarer types, believe it or not, the majority of those are technically considered neurodivergent.
Interesting.
A lot of them have very stereotypical kind of things that consist with neural divergency, especially INTPs. Yeah. INFPs, INFJs, INTJs, like all of those, ESTPs, ENFPs, ADHD, those type of people.
Interesting.
So a lot of that, and
so there's a link there.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There is a link.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of people in the world are sensory types rather than intuitive types. So, science, neuroscience, and medical science is all dominated by people who are sensory types. Majority of it is. So they will see things through a sensory lens. You know,
like what is just the most prominent, like the binaries, I suppose, of gender. Being the most prominent, but that's not the be all and end all of it. Yeah. See, it's interesting as well because I've been wanting to talk about autogynephilia, but I know it's very controversial.
Yeah, I'd happily talk about that again.
So in my journey on the podcast, I've come across one other person who's spoken about it, but they don't want to talk about it publicly. They just don't want to go there because for them, they feel like autogynephilia is definitely a thing for them. That is part of how they're wired, or what they are, or who they are. And for obvious reasons, they don't really want to talk about that publicly. So, I've also come across this. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but there is a zine made by trans women. The magazine itself is called Fucking Trans Women. And I just remember there was one thing that was really interesting that just got me thinking about it. And I feel gives a really great idea of what gender dysphoria can be like, because there's a little cartoon. It was a bit of a graphic one, but there's a cartoon of a trans woman wearing a strap on, because you can see her penis is sort of to the side somewhere, but she's wearing a strap on and she's pegging someone, and it's that is just something that is such an interesting concept, because it's there's all these assumptions, right? If you're a man or if you have a penis, this is what you're meant to be doing with it, and this is what you're meant to be enjoying doing with it. And if you don't, then what the fuck's wrong with you?
Actually, I kind of want to talk about that a bit because in a lot of ways, I kind of hated what I had to do with it, but still did it.
Yeah, because it's expected of you.
But it's not the fact that it's expected; it's the fact that, to a degree, it's enjoyable.
Physically,
yeah. I mean, it's only human. It's a human experience, and there are a lot of mixed feelings with it, especially with what comes afterwards. I feel, both with someone or when I'm not with someone, there's a lot of guilt that comes with it. It's
shame,
as well, and hatred towards it too. It's because of
it must be so conflicting.
It's
sounds really conflicting.
It really is.
Yeah.
In some cases, it can be slightly euphoric. It depends on what I'm thinking, But the majority of the other times, I think it's an annoyance because I'm doing this thing and it's that constant internal feeling of this is not what I want to feel like. This is not what I want to feel like.
Wow, yeah. Yeah.
I want to feel this way. I want to feel that way, or I hate how it looks, hate how it feels,
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also, from my discovery, I've also found, like, I don't know if this could be linked to like autogynephilia stuff as well. Like there's the forced feminization and castration, fetishes and fantasies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That are sort of all thrown into the mix. So, yeah.
Pretty intense.
Yeah. I do wish that it was just more. Actually, not more. I wish there was just less shame around it all.
Yeah.
Around not just that, but like sex and sexuality in general, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you mean, because especially when it comes to like relationships and stuff, I feel like people need to communicate a lot more in like sexual preferences and like what they like, what they don't like.
Totally, because we don't do that. We don't talk about stuff like that. There's so much assumed.
Yeah, like because people are so insecure on their fetishes, whether they know they like them or not. Like sometimes it takes a while for you to figure out what they are. And a lot of them, it's just personal preference, but like people will find certain fetishes taboo, you know.
Totally.
But unless you communicate that and you find the person who you can freely express that to with literally zero judgment, seriously, like the type of relationship you can form from that is insane. And a lot of people don't see that because they're so insecure about their sexual preference or their own kinks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally. Yeah.
One way to find out if you've got any kinks, eat spicy food.
What?
Yeah. Because spicy food, right, is not actually a taste. There's no such thing as spicy in taste on taste buds. The reason why it's spicy and hot is because of the chemical.
Right. Yeah.
That's in spicy food, right? It's literally a chemical that is causing your tongue pain, right? And if you like that, you might just be a bit kinky. So
that's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I might just be a little bit of a masochist, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, like it's all of that. But kind of just brushing up back onto so with the autogynephilic thing, another thing was like how there was like a double standard on how that it was mainly focusing on trans women and how that there's like literally like zero research done into trans men and like what they would feel like. I mean, I'm pretty sure that a trans man would like to penetrate women if they were straight, you know? So is it the same? So it's like such a... But like they don't look into that because they don't care about trans men.
To be honest, I think there is a lot of internalized misogyny at play there.
Yeah, and a lot of insecurity, I feel, as well. Like there's obviously this whole thing to do with toxic masculinity, but from a direction of insecurity about masculinity as well, like and how that if masculinity is becoming more feminine, that's wrong, or like vice versa, you know. A lot of people think that way.
It's all rooted in misogyny, though.
Yeah,
for sure.
Because
I think. Yeah,
like masculinity and femininity are literally a spectrum, you know, and there are extreme forms of each. There are toxic forms of each, you know. There are also divine forms of each. Yeah. So it's because, you know, they see that if a man is like feminine, that means he's weak, or
exactly.
Yeah, so like you have a lot of these like masculine types that are insecure of their own masculinity because they feel like that their masculinity could be corrupted by femininity when it's not actually true. Like, that's not how it works. You know? So, like, that's why I think that this whole concept of autogynephilia is this adverse response to certain insecurities. You know?
Yeah.
Like them being insecure of biological males doing things that are stereotypically like feminine, you know? So it's because they feel like that men should be masculine, women should be feminine, you know?
Yep. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So crazy world we live in right now.
Tell me about it. Are you happy to wrap it up there? For now.
Yeah, for now.
For now.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much for sharing.
It's okay.
Yay. You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/Christine, where you can also read the transcript and find further resources on the subjects discussed. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com, on social media and on YouTube. Again, if you'd like to support us, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender or buy us a coffee. Links are on the website. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open-minded. We could probably fill like several episodes, to be fair.
We could.
I think we could.
Whole series.
A whole series. Yeah, maybe we could do a series.
Have to use a different picture then.
That's cool.
Yeah. I have to see if I can find a different picture instead of that drawing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's like a drawing that I made when I was like 17, I think. Yeah.
What you mean even for this episode? Do you want to use a different picture?
Well, the reason why I chose that picture for it was because it was actually the first picture which I technically drew of. It's like an anime picture that I drew of myself, but I drew myself as a girl.
Yeah. And when did you draw it?
When I was 17.
17?
Yeah,
Wow.
when I first moved out. When I first went into residential care. So yeah, I used the picture. Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah, it's like the first picture. I mean, I don't have a full picture. I wish I still had it. I don't know where it went. But I still had a thing on my Facebook, so of just the face. Yeah, because back then I used to dye my hair, and I used to have like a red streak, and that's why in the drawing it's like red streaks.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a series.
We can totally do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tune in next time where we talk about the opalescence of water in terms of sacred geometry and how water contains memory, and that water is God. Yeah. God is genderless, by the way.
Totally.
Yeah.
Gender irrelevant up there. Beyond the 3D. Yeah. God damn it. Hold that thought.